back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, tons of rivers were toxic messes. And yet fish and other creatures were still alive in there, but hanging on by a thread. And so my little fantasy was like, imagine that one of these fish won a dream vacation and was all expenses paid to Lake Tahoe. And they go down to Lake Tahoe and they dropped in the Lake Tahoe and like, what is this? This isn't water. Water has all this other stuff in it too, like wood and nails and junk and plastic, and that's water. And they're swimming around this stuff. What is this? This feels so strange. What is this? And after a while, it's like, kind of like it here, actually. This feels really good. But the analogy, of course, being that many of us grow up in environments that were somewhat traumatic, maybe abusive, perhaps, at least stressful. Many of us, family environments or the town where we lived in or the country we came from, whatever, which there was a lot of stress, and that's what we knew. That was not odd to us. That was what we knew. Mm-hmm. And so we developed a physiology of stress. We developed the defense mechanisms of being consciously kind of on edge, looking out for, am I under threat now? Am I going to have to fight right now? Am I have to flee right now?
Hello, and welcome to episode 82 of the Living and Leading with Emotional Intelligence podcast. I am your host, Brittney-Nichole. Today's episode is going to be fairly unique in that this interview with Bruce Cryer was recorded back in December of 2019. This is my very first time interviewing anyone, and it wasn't for my Living and Leading podcast. That didn't come about until May of 2020. I wanted to interview Bruce because I fell in love with a book he co-authored with Doc Childre. I hope I'm not butchering that name, who founded HeartMath. And we'll talk more about HeartMath within this interview. So as you listen to this podcast, just know that this was my very first time ever interviewing anyone. And the reason that I held on to this interview for as long as I have is because, to be quite honest, I was judging myself pretty hard on the quality of my questions and interactions and just how I performed in conducting the interview. And I felt terrible because the message and the information that Bruce shared was fantastic and very useful and informative. So I decided for my Mindful Mention Monday, probably a month ago or so, to use a clip of that interview of Bruce Cryer. And today I'm deciding to release the full interview for the first time with Bruce Cryer. So please note that the quality of my mic is not the way it is today, and my interview skills are not on point. And while I started by judging myself, I had to stop and take a moment and say, you know what? I was doing my best in that moment. And it's been amazing to see how far that I've come over the past year and a half or so. So I hope you enjoy. Normally I do an introduction of the guest, but I do a fairly lengthy introduction at the beginning of this interview for Bruce. So without further ado, here's the interview with Bruce Cryer. I hope you enjoy.
Yeah.
All right. So this is my first book interview ever. So this should be interesting.
Great.
So bear with me.
No problem.
And I'll definitely make cuts and stuff.
You can hear me fine, I assume, with the headsets.
Yep, I hear you fine. Can you hear me okay?
Totally fine.
Perfect.
I sometimes feel like I wish I didn't have to use these. Today, the upstairs, they're moving some furniture. At least it's not a jackhammer.
Yeah.
So I think having just these as opposed to the mic from the laptop is probably better. So
that works. I can hear you loud and clear.
Great.
Awesome. So trying to put together a bio introduction for you was very difficult because you have such a lengthy background, which is awesome. But trying to focus on what exactly are we going to go over to define Bruce in a short amount of time. So I hope this does you justice. So I wanted to start with a brief introduction because you have been called the Renaissance Man because of your diverse backgrounds. Because you've been a singer, actor, dancer, publisher, author, CEO, you're a coach, mentor to other leaders, and a consultant. So you have this very extensive background. And I wanted to kind of give a little bit more context to where that began. So when you were a junior in high school, correct me if I'm wrong, you were given the lead role in The Carousel, which was a high school play, correct? And then within
pretty close. I was a senior in high
senior,
school,
okay.
and yes, I was given the lead role in a Broadway musical that my high school was doing called Carousel.
And then within 2 years of that, you played the lead role in one of the longest or the longest running musicals, The Fantastics, which you had over 800 performances with.
That's correct.
And then you moved to California, where you kind of got into nutrition and then publishing, found HeartMath, invested about 25 years within HeartMath, which 11 you were a CEO. And within that time is when you published this book that we're going to be talking about today, correct?
Yes.
With Doc, and who was the founder of HeartMath.
Yes.
So then you experienced kind of, I guess, a rebirth, if you will, whenever you started to experience a lot of health issues, which started with cancer of the bladder. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. And then that led to something during that process. You got a staph infection and then hip replacements. And in that time, you lost your mother. So tell us a little bit about how that kind of changed your perspective in what life meant to you and how you went to go into the project of what makes your heart sing in starting the Renaissance Human today.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Sorry. That wasn't too much, but you've got a lot going on there.
Yeah, it has been a rich life, that's for sure. Well, you're going through all of that, and it's always interesting to hear somebody else describe it. Luckily, it's so far in the past now. I mean, I'm over it for over 8 years now, and most of it started more than 10 years ago. So it feels like more and more in the past as opposed to still a part of my life. But you know how people often talk about something happens like the loss of a job or a divorce or something as a big wake-up call. Well, what you just heard is a bunch of wake-up calls. It was like a telemarketer. It was like if my higher self needed telemarketing to get through to me, that's what it would have done. And I should have put on the no robocalls, but I didn't. So as time went on, it became clearer and clearer to me that really the message of this series of health issues, which were fairly scary. I mean, it wasn't like I felt I was at death's door. Although when I had the staph infection in my blood, that was a call from the doctor saying, right away, go to the hospital now. This is life-threatening. And while I was in the hospital, the word life-threatening kept being used. The nurse would come in and say, oh, you have staph. Oh, that's life-threatening. And they kept saying life-threatening. And I thought, okay, I got it on the first time you said it. And that's when I went to the hospital. Like, why are you reminding me? What value is this supposed to give to me as the person with the life-threatening condition? Oh, great. You're aggravating my fear every few minutes. That's really helpful. So it was a very challenging time in all kinds of levels beyond just the physical. So it really was a wake-up call to, well, what do I really want to be in my life if I make it through this? And luckily, at a certain point, I began to feel, about a year and a half into it, when I was about to have the hip replacements done, that I was going to be okay, that the cancer had gone away, and that there was no sign of any recurrence at all. Tumor was gone, the staph infections were gone, and now I had this amazing doctor who was basically saying, we're going to gift you some new hips and you're going to be amazing. And he was like super enthusiastic. like he may have been a male cheerleader in high school. I'm not sure, because he was just really enthusiastic guy. But I thought, he's my guy. I need that kind of person. This has been a rough period here. So gradually, this awakening was happening that I'm really missing more creative expression, that I felt like I had been when I was younger, expressing myself in all kinds of ways creatively, singing, dancing, acting, art. I had a small art business in New York City as well for a while. And I wasn't doing any of that. All of that had gone. And now I was managing a company, which I was fairly good at, but it didn't make my heart sing. And so I began more and more to feel like, God, there's more that I want to be doing. And the impulse to want to sing started, and a variety of kind of wonderful occurrences happened. And this old friend of mine that had been my college roommate when we were both in the Oberlin Conservatory, a marvelous school for musicians. I reconnected with him. We started hanging out on weekends, playing music, and I started getting my voice back. And one thing led to another, and before long, Kaiser Permanente, the amazing American healthcare system, had hired us to do what we called a keynote performance. And it was actually, I'd already been hired by them to do a keynote talk. And I went back to them and I said, well, I've got a new idea. Instead of just me talking for 2 hours, how about I bring an Emmy Award-winning composer with me? My college roommate was a 7-time Emmy Award-winning composer. Why don't I bring him along? We'll do live music. We'll get the audience singing. They'll love it. It'll be all about inspiration. We'll still share all the stuff around healthcare and patients and all that I know so well. And what do you think? And they said, yeah, that sounds awesome. So thus was born this project called What Makes Your Heart Sing, which was coming out of my recognition of what made my heart sing, which was to be more creative. That there was this part of me that still wanted to sing, wasn't finished singing. There was a part of me that I didn't think I was ever going to dance again, because I thought metal hips don't sound like a great thing for a dancer. Found out wrong. Metal hips are super strong hips. So if I was willing to put the work in to rebuild the muscles and the ligaments and get them flexible again, actually, I was unlimited to what I could do, and that's what the doctor told me. I believed him.
Wow.
And I'm dancing, and I discovered I could dance again, which still amazes me. Every day I do something, and my body feels 30, and I think, God, I never imagined this would come out like this. This is wow, amazing. So with each of those moments of I'm singing again, and my body is able to dance again, the amount of appreciation that I would experience and still do, as you can hear in my voice, was kind of the feeling of like I'm being reborn. Like these parts of me that I was kind of okay with leaving in my past were coming to life again. And little by little, people started saying to me, you're like a Renaissance man. Meaning not just that I had these multiple things that I did, like artistic things and business things, which was the sort of traditional definition of a Renaissance man, multi-talented, multi-skilled person, but that I was like reborn, like literally, based on the health stuff. And those parts of me that had been dormant were also being reborn. So people would say this to me, and I thought, interesting. Nobody ever called me a Renaissance man until now, because I never was. I was either only an actor, and then I just kind of put that on the shelf and got into health and spirituality and business and forgot about the music stuff. And then gradually that came in, and then it went back out, and then I got really sick. And then I thought, wait a minute, I'm all of this. I still love the business. I haven't stopped being a consultant and a mentor and a teaching at Stanford and all that. I still love that. But I'm also getting to sing in New York City every couple of weeks. And that's like, I'm singing in New York City. That's crazy.
That's awesome.
So
instead of just
it's the blending of all these things.
Yeah.
It's the blending of all these things. For me, it's honoring, these are the things that I love to do. I don't have to do them equally. I don't have to get paid for all of them. It's not about that. It's about the fulfillment of me as a complete human being, which has become my passion to help awaken that in others without having to go through that particular set of experiences to get to that awakening. Yeah.
That is great. And I'm kind of finding that a little bit in myself more, because when I was younger, I would sing as well, and I was kind of artistic. But in our society, that's not really, you're not told you can be all of those things. That's not reality. You need to get a job, and you need to have a major, and that's what you need to focus on. So I think that's awesome that you've been able to incorporate all of those things in your life and that you're bringing that awareness that any of us can do that. But what I want to focus on specifically today is when we started our conversation, gosh, it doesn't seem like it's been a year ago, but I think it's been almost a year since we started talking. We didn't really start talking about this book until several months ago, but I'm so glad you sent it my way, because being someone who has started a business around emotional intelligence, I've really found that there's more to it than just a strategy. And unfortunately, I feel like that's the direction a lot of organizations want to take things that are soft skills and interpersonal skills, is a strategy. These are the steps to doing this, and that's just not reality. So when I read this book, by the way, I want to show you how many tabs I have in this book. Like, it's insane. So when I was trying to come up with questions for this book, it was extremely difficult because it's so multifaceted. There's so many directions that you could take this. But together, I feel like it all was talking about having that compassion and understanding for one another, coming from a place of the heart versus just all logic. But there's logic tied into that. And I think that's what HeartMath is about. So what inspired you to co-author this book with Doc? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, actually, the inspiration was a publisher approached us about writing a book on the kind of business approach to HeartMath. And they wanted me to write that because at the time I was the head of the corporate group for HeartMath, meaning I was the one with a team. There was a team of us who were doing consulting and training into major companies around HeartMath. And that included huge companies like Shell, Unilever, Motorola, NASA, World Bank. And so I was getting to be fairly known within the HeartMath context as, oh, he's kind of the corporate guy. He's the one that's doing a lot of the translation of the HeartMath tools and scientific research into language that executives and managers and factory workers and white collar workers and anybody can relate to and apply to their business life as well as to their personal life. So the publisher, Butterworth Hyman, the original publisher, is who approached us. And I loved the idea because we had built a whole model, which is what the book talks about, which we called inner quality management. At the time in the 90s, something very prevalent in the business world called TQM, which was total quality management. It was based on systems of improving quality inside a company, especially manufacturing companies, which was the biggest companies in the world then were manufacturing and energy companies, not technology companies like we have 20 years later. So it was a whole different world. Oil companies and massive manufacturing companies were the big ones. So total quality management was this movement that had come in to help systems improve and get more efficient and processes improve. And there was some awareness that the people needed to be efficient as well, but it was by and large very function oriented and process oriented, and let's find ways to improve the workflow, and all that is great. But the wise ones of that time were saying, what about the people? Everything about total quality management or any corporate initiative is fundamentally brought in because of the people and by the people. Just like you were saying, Brittney, a minute ago, in so many cases, the implementation of things like emotional intelligence become an HR strategy, as opposed to a real understanding of the sensitive issues of humans, of why some are super good at certain emotional intelligence skills and others are super not good. So there's sensitivities there, there's subtleties, there's nuance, there's human interaction dynamics that are not just about processes and workflows and all that kind of stuff.
It can be messy.
It can be super messy.
Yeah.
Kind of ought to be if you're being human. So inner quality management was our sort of answer to that, and saying, if you want to do the total quality stuff, we can facilitate that because we've got focus on the inner quality of the individual, which then affects the quality of a team. Because if let's say you're helping everybody inside a team manage themselves better, manage their own stress better, manage their communication skills better, manage their emotional reactions and emotional self-regulation better, and you bring those sets of skills to a team, and you bring a common language to a team, so they're kind of, oh wow, we're all people here. We're all stressed out more than we want to be. We all get triggered by things, and it doesn't help us in terms of doing our job better or communicating better. We're all in this together. We can all kind of ratchet up, because instead of having all these internal conflicts within the team, doesn't mean all the conflicts go away, but now you have a language and a set of skills and tools to improve that situation. So inequality management was our way of, that was the label and all the components that were within that, the modules, etc. That is what we were teaching in companies. And so let's write about what we're teaching, and give lots of stories of organizations from, semiconductor companies to airlines to, the military to schools and to hospitals, and let them talk about how this work has impacted the lives of the people, and as well as what outcomes have been impacted inside the organization too. So that was pretty much it. Got a call one day. We'd like you to write a book. Oh,
That's awesome.
Okay. I think I can do that.
That's great. So, and that was back in the 90s. And I feel like today, emotional intelligence is more of a buzzword in organizations. However, when I'm speaking with leaders and potential clients, they still don't quite understand what emotional intelligence is. And I noticed when you sent me a picture of the first draft of the book, or not draft, but the first time you published it, I believe it had a different subtitle. It was Advancing Organizations and Emotional Intelligence. And then you switched that to the power to change performance. What was the reasoning for switching out that subtitle?
Well, when we switched it, so 99 is when the book first came out with the subtitle of Advancing Organizational and Emotional Intelligence, whatever it was. That it was a mouthful. It felt too long, number one. When that came out, it was about 4 years after the publication of Daniel Goleman's book, which exploded onto the scene, called Emotional Intelligence, which chronicled all these studies showing that the best leaders were predictable based upon their EQ, not their IQ. And, all these sort of set of skills that he was rolling up and calling emotional intelligence, self-awareness skills, social skills, fundamentally. And so it was gaining more currency. It was gaining more acceptance in the organizational world. And, as these things happen, especially in the leadership development side, they thrive on fads, so who's got the hot idea? Because everybody's always looking for something new to take to their leaders in hopes that we'll finally get through to these Neanderthals, these gangs in suits that I call the CEOs, C-suite people. So emotional intelligence was kind of the flavor of the month a bit in those days, but it was getting quite popular, and there were a lot of big people who were talking about it, writing about it, and adopting it. So and HeartMath was very aligned without trying to be. I mean, just the essence of what HeartMath was about emotional regulation. And it absolutely was about self-awareness and social and communication skills. That's what it was. And so when he came in, Goleman and others writing about it as well, defining it, it was like, well, that's kind of what HeartMath is talking about in many ways. We just hadn't chosen to call it emotional intelligence. That term didn't exist yet. But by the time we were revising it, we took it back from the publisher a couple of years after it was initially published, because we just felt like we wanted to own it ourselves and be more flexible with it. And I did a big revision then, and then a few years later did another revision. So there's at least 2 significant revisions. And somewhere in there, we had concluded that to present this most effectively to a corporate audience, performance was the metric, the general metric that every leader cared about.
Yeah.
Emotional intelligence is not a metric. So it's not, so just having that in the subtitle is like, that's not an outcome that a leader is looking for. I'm going to have more emotional intelligence. That's not an outcome. That sounds like qualities that are good. And most of us would say essential, not just good. but it's not a benefit. But the power to change performance, oh, okay. So you have a way we can change performance, because that's part of every CEO's, every executive, every manager's performance review every year. Has performance improved? Performance as measured by any number of things, depending upon what the job is and what the company does. So it just fit. It felt like it was that language, from chaos to coherence, the power to change performance, was a better, tighter way to talk about what the benefit that an executive who is considering bringing this into their company could experience.
Turning those tangibles or the intangibles into something tangible for them.
Exactly. And luckily the book, as you know, is full of data. So there's all these examples of where performance was improving. And so it wasn't just hyperbole, it wasn't just hype to say performance is going to improve. We had lots of stories and lots of data and to support that idea.
I can't tell you how much I highlighted in this book. I mean, you saw the tabs, right? But the highlighting goes beyond that. But one thing early on that was stated in the book, it says, and I quote, "Organizations will make only incremental improvements in effectiveness and sustainability until a more thorough and sensitive understanding of human processes resides at the core of how organizations function." And I think this is key. And following that, you went on to discuss the 3 brains. So not just our brain, but the heart as a second brain and the gut as a third brain. So could you explain how understanding how all 3 of these work together impacts effectiveness and sustainability?
How long do we have to answer that question? Yeah.
30 minutes now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, great question. Well, let me back up a little bit. One of the things that I've always loved about explaining the science of HeartMath are some of the analogies that we kind of came to. And one now will address this issue. So back about 30, 40 years ago, computing was nothing like it is now, right? We didn't have smartphones. We didn't have laptops. We didn't even have desktop computers that could do anything significant. There were mainframes. The era that I'm going back to is when the computer was a mainframe. And you had to be in a big enough company that would even have a mainframe. And so the mainframe meant this giant box that might be the size of a whole football field if it was a massive company. That was the brain of the computing. And then on the desk of the worker, even the executive, was a terminal that didn't really do anything other than show you what you had access to off the mainframe. So basically the model of computing was giant computer, giant brain somewhere in the basement, and dumb terminals that could just reflect certain strands of information that it had accessible. Back in those days, our model of human intelligence was big brain, big computer in the skull, all the other organs dumb, basically slaves to the big computer upstairs. I don't know which came first, which realization came first, but it was quite fascinating to watch the parallels. So as computing started to become more decentralized, it was no longer about just a big box. The breakthroughs would happen in the creation of microchips in particular, and suddenly you had on the desktop not just a dumb terminal, but a computer capable of what 10 years earlier had to be done by this massive $1 million piece of equipment housed in a special cold room downstairs. Now, the same computing power was available on your desktop. That was like a crazy expansion. But the notion of computing was now different. It wasn't just a big brain somewhere that only rare people could have access to. No, anybody could have it. So now intelligence and knowledge was accessible, was far more accessible, much more shared, was the model. And along that same time, research happened, like around the discovery of the neural network in the heart, that when they looked deeper enough at this, which was the early 90s, they said this neural network in the heart has all the functional characteristics of an actual brain. So we have to consider it a brain, like it's processing information, it's intelligent. The heart's not just a dumb pump being told what to do by the brain. it's intelligent. It's sharing information with the brain. The brain's able to make decisions based on information, intelligence coming from the heart. And likewise in the gut, what's called the enteric brain or gut brain, massive neural network, hundreds of millions of neurons, processing information out the wazoo and in constant communication with the brain upstairs.
Gut
And
feelings.
so gut feeling. So this idea of trusting your gut, is not esoteric. It's like there's a neural network that is processing information down there, feeding information north to the brain. So gradually we start to wait a minute. It's not just big, smart terminal up here or mainframe up here and everything else dumb, just responding to commands like just tell me what to do. Just like and it's not just the mainframe computer anymore downstairs and your desktop is useless. To it all shifting, and now the model of human intelligence is that there's intelligence everywhere, and there's probably other brains that we even know about that may not look like we have limitations in our conception of what these things could look like or function like, but intelligence is everywhere, just like in computers. Now, this. And what's going to be the next iteration where it's not even in that form factor anymore?
Right.
So the access to information is completely changed. Our mindset around it, our view of it is completely changed. So I think this realization that science came up with about the human body, that at least three brains exist and probably many more, and they're in constant communication. That was kind of like, on some level, well, that makes perfect sense. Because you can't run a life simply from the mind. You need to have inspiration. You need to have passion. You need to have things that give you a sense of value or impact or mission or visions in your life that you're working towards. That's the heart. That's not just the brain. And so I think part of what HeartMath came in to say was that it's no accident that every civilization of the world for thousands of years revered the heart as a source of intuition, of courage, of wisdom, of insight. Then Descartes comes along, the scientist of reason says, no, it's not that way. And science kind of bought in, Western science, not Eastern science. Western science bought in. Yeah, he's right. It's all the brain. The brain's the magic computer, and everything else is just. The ancients, they didn't have science to validate this stuff, so how could they have known that it was really wise or intuitive? No, we don't want to believe that. So the civilization kind of went through this breakup of loving its own heart. So we came along and said, there's something wrong here, guys. We can't deny the power of the heart beyond its value as a pump, that it is indeed a source of intelligence and wisdom and guidance. And so HeartMath as an organization set out to prove that through mainstream science methods, but also to create a system of techniques and technology, and through books like From Chaos to Coherence, stories, to help people realize, wow, when you practice things to, quote, awaken your heart or enable you to listen to your heart, you get smarter. You get ideas. You get creative ideas. You remember things because the heart is intelligent. It's not just a pump. And it's not just weak, that's for sure.
That's
so
awesome.
it's just kind of, to me, it's always been fun to realize, just as we were very patriarchal about computing, one big box that only special people got to operate, and the slaves only got the little terminals. Now it's kind of like you got as much power here as any combination you ever had, and it's right there in the palm of your hand. So it's everybody, and the same in our bodies. It's intelligence is everywhere. So it's more about how to align the systems in our body, how to bring them into coherence. So it's not the brain doing one thing and the heart saying something totally different, and the gut in a whole nother area, which leads to stress, leads to frustration, leads to bad decisions, leads to unhappiness, leads to lack of fulfillment, right? So alignment of these systems is what HeartMath is about, what a lot of spiritual philosophies, and ultimately what emotional intelligence is about. Get ourselves aligned. We're not wasting energy, and we're not doing things that are going to cause more stress and more strain for us and the others that we interact with or work with.
That kind of goes off of when people say that they have a bad vibe around something. I want to talk about kind of the energy field and some of the data that's been backed by HeartMath. So we often say that we have a bad vibe around someone, or we're getting a vibe off of someone. And this book talked about different frequencies. And some may associate when you talk about frequencies as being kind of woo-woo. However, HeartMath has shown scientific data backing these frequencies. Can you talk a little bit more about frequencies and the association and just the research backing that from HeartMath?
Yeah. Well, the word frequency is a science word, of course, it's a physics word, and we used it in that context, actually. So, I think some people in the spiritual world use it less scientifically, and so then it just kind of loses some credibility. But fundamentally, the electromagnetic spectrum, which is what everything we can see is exists within, everything we can hear exists within the electromagnetic spectrum. It's where all the light exists, the frequencies of light, the frequencies of sound.
Yep.
The electromagnetic spectrum is a range of frequencies. That's the physics term for it. It's not a New Age term. So human consciousness, human physiology exists within certain band ranges of this electromagnetic spectrum, which all civilization operates within. So gravity is in one end of it. Ultraviolet light, which we can't see, is in another portion of it. Sound that we can hear is in one range of it, but then there's other sounds that our faculties can't hear that dogs can hear, right? So they're frequencies that a dog can hear and pick up on that we can't hear. So it's just like we can see certain things, but you can't see X-rays. Your eyes cannot look inside a body and see that, but equipment can do that. But because they're picking up on a different segment of that electromagnetic spectrum. So all this is to say that all life exists within this electromagnetic spectrum, and it also means that anything living and anything electrical creates a field. So a human system is in part electrical, and that's not the New Age concept. That is a biological term. The electrocardiogram, which is the measure of the heartbeat, the electrical output of the heart, is electrical. So every time the heart beats, it contracts, sends blood, pushes it out into the system, but at the time of the contraction is an electrical impulse that's being sent out, which is why so the heart's beating all at the same time. So there's a beat of the heart, a contraction, and this electrical signal all being produced. And the electrical signal with any living thing, and even non-living things like electrical wires in your building or electrical transformers, radio towers, whatever, out in nature somewhere, anything that's electrical, by definition, a field is created around that electrical energy. So the electrical wires in the building, you can measure a field around it. You can measure electrical field around a plant, around a human being, around an animal, anything alive, because if there's an electrical signal in it, by definition, it's creating a field. The field can vary depending upon how strong the signal is, how coherent the signal is. So there's a lot of ways it varies, but everything electrical in the known universe creates a field around it. That's just what happens. We didn't discover that. We didn't invent that. It's what is. Physicists way smarter than us, way before us, figured all that out. So, and it's a topic that is a deep one. It can take you deep, and but I think to kind of bring it back to practicality, part of what was exciting about what we came up with at HeartMath in the early 90s was that we were able to draw a link between what's happening electrically in the body and emotional states.
There you go.
Basically, we were able to show that how the heart is beating, the patterns of how the heart beats. And let me just say, there's a field within cardiology known as heart rate variability. And it's the study of the fact that every time the heart is beating, all day long, all night long, the speed is always changing. The speed of our heart is increasing for a while and decreasing for a while. It's speeding up for a while and slowing down for a while. It's always doing that. It's never just a straight line, just flat. In fact, if it does go flat, that's not a good thing.
Or death.
Exactly. Or you're on the way there. You're not necessarily dead, or it wouldn't be beating at all. So it's supposed to vary. It's supposed to speed up for a while and slow down. What we discovered in the early 90s was when we would measure people experiencing different emotional states, the patterns were totally different. So, for example, anytime somebody was stressed out and therefore they were angry and that made them stressful, they were frustrated, or they were impatient, or they were depressed or overwhelmed, any of the emotions we would think of as stressful, the pattern of the heart was chaotic. It's like it's all over the place, kind of like an earthquake, a chaos pattern. And then we discovered if you asked anyone to just think about things that they appreciated in their life, a beautiful day, their pet, their grandmother, their co-workers that are so wonderful, where they live, whatever it may be, any appreciation, any joy, any compassion, any peace, any love that someone would feel, would put the heart into a completely different pattern. It was like a beautiful waveform. This beautiful, like in physics, scientists would look at the wave produced by someone feeling love, and they'd say, that's a coherent waveform. Wow, that's really different than when you're frustrated. It's an incoherent waveform, the language of physics again. So we came in and said, this is interesting. This is really interesting. It makes sense. And back to your point about the bad vibes, or the bad, somebody having a bad vibe. We were saying, yeah, and that's an actual scientific. We can say it scientifically. The frequency, the actual electromagnetic frequency, does change inside a person and can be measured outside a person when their emotions are changing. So you can be around somebody who's in a bad mood and feel it. They don't even need to say something. You can sense it sometimes.
What I really enjoyed with the data that you provided, and I guess where I was going with the whole woo-woo, is oftentimes people say, oh, there's no way that we interact with one another. Like our frequencies don't interact. But HeartMath has proven that if you are around someone who may have that incoherent state, it can influence you, or you can influence them if you have a coherent state. And I think that's hard for some people to wrap their heads around, that we can have that influence on one another.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I think on one hand, everybody knows that's true, because just think about, like I was talking to somebody earlier today and saying that, everybody's got someone who pushes their buttons. It could be a mother-in-law, it could be a sibling, it could be a coworker, it could be the boss, whatever. And as soon as you see them, or as soon as you get the email or get the, oh my God, it's her calling, you have this reaction. And so that kind of already proves that we're being affected by each other, and all the time, actually. And especially it tends to be true when you're physically near them. If somebody's having a bad day, they don't need to say much, but you can often feel like, what's going on here?
Yep, exactly.
So it's we actually already know this. We actually already observe this. It's not spiritual people that know this somehow. We observe this. It's pretty obvious. It was HeartMath that came along and tried to make it normalized and said, look, there's a reason we feel it. It's science. These are real frequencies present in how the body is operating and doing its normal work. And those frequencies are changing depending upon what our emotional state is. And we're measuring that with scientific equipment, not with special magic wands or something. This is real science going on. So I think it's a big deal, because even though people can say, oh, no, Brittney, your energy is not going to be having any effect on me. Okay, let's say it wasn't Brittney. Let's imagine you're at the ticket counter trying to change, and your flight's just been delayed. You think the person behind the ticket counter, who's up to here with 500 passengers and is treating you like shit, you think that's not having an effect on your day? Really? Well, it's not affecting my heart or my brain. Really? So you're feeling great. You're feeling just wonderful the whole time and having no reactions whatsoever. Really? So in other words, people's own experience says, well, of course they're affecting me. The fact that maybe you can measure it in the heart or the brain, that could sound a little Star Trek-y to some people. But science discovers new things all the time. And it's kind of like, wow, I didn't know that was possible. And then before long, we realized, yeah, it's always been possible. It's always been happening. We just now can measure it. So it
Exactly.
sounds kind of crazy, but it's been going on since time immemorial. So.
And unfortunately, it takes a lot of people to see that on paper, right? To say, okay, I always thought that, but now I can see it. And so whenever organizations will come to me, they have a problem, right, around their human capital. They'll say, okay, we need to fix this. Can you come in and do a half-day workshop or a full day? And that's frustrating to me because they often want to treat something that is a soft skill or a human, something that needs to be formed, right? You can't teach somebody to care overnight. Like you can come in and teach somebody to code, right, through a workshop. So when somebody comes to you wanting you to implement something like teaching HeartMath in a one-day lunch and learn, and they want these massive results, is that possible? What do you say to that?
A lunch and learn to get massive results. Yeah. Not very likely. If something was put in the lunch that would totally change their attitudes towards life, maybe you have a shot at it. Yeah, I mean, it's the culture we live in, isn't it? I mean, we're so oriented towards the quick fix, and I think one analogy for this would be, what a stress fracture is. Where people get stress fractures in their feet, for example, from running, but it wasn't from running one day. It was from running for months and months and months and months with the wrong shoe or on a very hard surface. So let's say the approach that says, can you transform my culture into lunch and learn, would be the doctor saying, let me put a pin in your foot where you keep doing this to yourself, and that'll solve it. Well, no, the problem is you're running every day with the wrong shoes, or you shouldn't be a runner, or you're running on a hard surface. That's the cause. You're putting a pin in the source of the problem and hoping that's going to solve it, but you haven't dealt with the cause. So that's unfortunately that's the approach here. Unless you are going to deal with the behaviors and the assumptions and the mindsets of the people in some consistent way, no matter, it could be, Jesus walking in and doing a lunch and learn, and people be checking their emails the whole time, because number one, they wouldn't believe it's really him, and number two, that would feel more urgent than this other thing that's being discussed at the lunch and learn. So I think it's a challenge, but I think most enlightened business leaders realize that anything you're trying to do, when you're needing to change culture, and that could even just be you're taking on a whole new brand for the company, and so you need to exemplify that brand. Let's say that the brand of the company needs to refresh. You've had the same brand for 20 years and it's feeling kind of old and stagnant, and you're feeling like there's these new companies that are taking over because they're fresh and they're young and they've got all this great energy, and you try to do a brand refresh. And so, but what that really means is you got a new logo, you got a new tagline, you got a new website, but every single attitude within the company has not changed. You just put a new picture, you just put a new face on the whole thing. Well, the changing of the brand, the feeling of how it conveys to the customer is not going to get changed overnight. It's not going to happen in the lunch and learn. The behaviors have to be ingrained in the people for a while, because they've been operating out of the 20-year-old ones for a long time. So that doesn't just change with the lunch and learn. And number two, you want to make sure they've not just changed, but they've learned how to sustain the change. And that happens with repeated practice and support, and realizing we're all in this together. And this is something that's important to us as people. We are people here first. We're not workers first. We're people first. So all those are elements of why anything to really change a culture needs to be embedded. It needs to be much longer term. It doesn't mean you can't do lunch and learns as part of a process to start to socialize and get people aware of, here's where we're going with this. But lunch and learn is that's the Band-Aid approach, but the arm is hanging on by a thread because it's been hit by a machete. I got a Band-Aid to cover that. Band-Aid. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And going back to the way that our society thinks, the social norm is that a lot of us don't understand our emotions. We've never really been taught to think about our emotions and how we impact others. We're a very egocentric society, I feel like, for the most part. And one thing I was reading in your book was talking about growing up on the Hudson River and how the fish in the Hudson, all they knew was that polluted water. That's all they knew. They had no taste of clean water. And I think about that when I think about our society and the lack of awareness of coherence that we have. And you talked about maladaptation. So I kind of wanted you to talk a little bit more about the impacts that has on our behavior and our mindset in our current corporate world.
Well, first of all, it's fun, very fun to me, the oddity that when I wrote that and came up with that phrase, growing up in the Hudson River, I never in a million years imagined I would live on the Hudson River ever, let alone that I would be now. And that's where I am. I can see the Hudson River from my window right now. And when I came up with that analogy, it was the reality that back when I was a kid growing up in New Jersey, not too far from the Hudson River, you'd hear tales of these poor fish that were all missing fins and had cancers, and because the water was not clean. There's oil and all kinds of stuff being dumped in and toxic chemicals all the time. It's not a happy place. This was not just the Hudson River. Back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, tons of rivers were toxic messes. And yet fish and other creatures were still alive in there, but hanging on by a thread. And so my little fantasy was like, imagine that one of these fish won a dream vacation and was all expenses paid to Lake Tahoe. And they go down to Lake Tahoe and they're dropped in the Lake Tahoe and like, what is this? This isn't water. Water has all this other stuff in it too, like wood and nails and junk and plastic, and that's water. And they're swimming around this stuff. What is this? This feels so strange. What is this? And after a while, it's like, kind of like it here, actually. It feels really good. But the analogy, of course, being that many of us grow up in environments that were somewhat traumatic, maybe abusive, perhaps, at least stressful. Many of us, family environments or town where we lived in or the country we came from, whatever, which there was a lot of stress, and that's what we knew. That was not odd to us. That was what we knew. Mm-hmm. And so we developed a physiology of stress. We developed the defense mechanisms of being consciously kind of on edge, looking out for, am I under threat now? Am I going to have to fight right now? Am I have to flee right now? Because many people, and I'm not just talking about people in refugee situations that seem extreme, many people that I've talked to were, they seem incredibly well-adjusted, warm-hearted people now. And to hear what went on in their childhood is like, oh my God, how did you come out like this now? Well, it took a lot of work. So they had adapted as children because that was the only option. But then to kind of unadapt as they had, where stress or abuse or trauma felt normal, to start to build the circuitry when that doesn't feel normal. And what does start to feel normal is care and connection and support and harmony and two people. Like Brittany, I'm literally pointing at you right now, and kind of also delighted at how we even know each other. I mean, it was a LinkedIn connection. I don't even remember. Yep. You initiated, I initiated, whatever it was, doesn't matter. We connected kind of randomly in a way. I think it was emotional intelligence was the link somehow, whatever it was. Yeah. And here we are now. We had a number of conversations. Wonderful. I thoroughly enjoy you. And I think how marvelous it is that we have this way, and we've never met in person, that we can connect. And heart-to-heart connect, not just talking knowledge or talking in business or whatever. So we have to build that circuitry and appreciate that when we have relationships that give us meaning, that's where we want to go. I want more of that. I want more of people that want to give to me, and I want to give to them, because that makes me richer, and then I can help them be richer. And it's just this virtuous cycle that keeps us growing and expanding and feeling more fulfilled. So ultimately, that's what it's about. And growing up in the Hudson River, I mean, happy ending to the story, the Hudson River is a way healthier river now than it was back then, because a lot of people woke up to the fact that, man, I wouldn't want to be a fish in this thing. I don't want to be a human in this thing. I don't want to go in this river. So it's a fun analogy to just realize we got a lot of things we have to wake up. We've gotten used to. I think this is especially relevant when we think about certain people in certain situations where we continue to react in justified ways to people, we're living in the physiology of stress, as Dr. Joe Dispenza likes to call it.
Yes.
And the limitation is around ourself, that we're convinced we will never have the success that someone else in our family is enjoying, or somebody else that was a friend in school. And we're just convinced. And so the physiology is reinforcing that we're not going to expand out of that. And so back to the electromagnetics, the signal, if you will, that we're putting out to the world is one of fear or of limitation or
Scarcity.
self-doubt or of scarcity.
Yeah.
That's the energy that's going out. If some people say, what do you mean it's going out? Well, the people that you interact with pick up on it on some level. Your clients, your customers, your peers, your colleagues, they can kind of sense, oh, he's having a rough time. He seems a bit desperate. He seems a bit insecure. They might not say the signal he's putting out is that. They would just say, and there's something that doesn't quite feel right. Well, that's
Right.
the energy you're putting out is what doesn't quite feel right.
And I believe in the book you call
Sense
that
it.
the emotional virus, right? It
Exactly.
spreads. It spreads.
It can easily spread. Exactly.
And we need to switch that and put out the compassion and understanding and get that to spread. And I'm hoping that with your story of the Hudson River and how that got cleaned up and there was this awakening, I'm hoping, and it feels like there's starting to become that awakening now to humanity and understanding and caring, because we've hit this wall and we've started to polarize so much that something feels like it's slowly starting to kind of bring it back together. And we're right at the hour now, but I was hoping I could ask for one more question,
Sure.
If that's okay. So in the book, you talk about freeze frame.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of different tools and strategies and things that you talk about in the book, but I was hoping you could explain what is freeze frame and how does that work?
Freeze frame is one of my favorite all-time tools of HeartMath. And as the name implies, freeze frame, it implies a stopping of the action. So if there was a movie going along, let's say we're sitting in a movie theater and God forbid the movie stops, the frame, there were many flowing past you, suddenly stops and you just see a static image. So that's freeze frame in a movie context. Doc Childre came up with freeze frame as the name of a technique, which was also back in the 80s, a song by the Jay Giles Band. So when we were starting out, there were a fair number of people who actually knew the song. And so they kind of liked the name of the technique because it was a song that was, the word had appeared in a song. But the concept in relationship to our stress and to changing our mindsets and attitudes is, let's say you're aware you're reacting to something. Let's pick somebody that pushes your buttons. And so you realize, he's doing that thing again. I feel it. I feel that annoyance, that frustration. It's right there in me. With freeze frame, you would say to yourself, okay, hit the pause button on that reaction. Let's just pause that. You're aware of what you're feeling. You're in that frustration, or you're feeling annoyance right now. Just pause that. Now, focus your attention in the area of your heart, which in the HeartMath concept, in the HeartMath research, the act of focusing around the heart shifts your attention from whatever your upset was doing and can start to activate this heart brain thing we talked about. But it also, more importantly, it starts to get the pattern smoother because it's chaotic, which we had proven already based on the fact you're annoyed or you're frustrated. We know the heart rate's going to be all over the place. So by bringing your focus here, that starts to calm the system down a little bit. Then you start to breathe and start to slow down your breathing a little bit. And you kind of imagine that your breath is going in and out through the heart. So basically within this idea of you kind of freezing the frame, fairly quickly, you're bringing your attention to your heart, you're breathing a little more slowly. And the concept then was you've now taken some of the energy out of that reaction that you were just having. You might have been feeling in your gut, as a knot in your stomach, or you're kind of frustrated up there. So now you just kind of, let's bring it down a notch here. Let's freeze that reaction. We're not going to ignore it, but we're going to deal with it, but just freeze it for a moment. And now let's shift our physiology Because in that process, we're liable to have an answer or some clarity on how to resolve. That's not just the reptilian brain solution.
Emotional
Ah,
hijacking.
emotional hijacking, exactly. So in that process, as you're breathing, then the idea was to reflect on some positive feeling, anything that you can appreciate, anything that gives you a feeling of peace. So we're trying to help you shift your emotional state. We're still going to deal with the situation. So you're trying to shift your emotional state by focusing on something you appreciate or some pleasant feeling you've had from the past, like a time you were on a beach, if you love the beach, and the weather was spectacular. It was a sunset. It was just, oh my God, that kind of thing. Then the real power of the freeze frame technique is you ask yourself, what would be another perspective or even a solution that would reduce the stress of the person that's bugging you or this problem you're having, and be more efficient overall. So you're looking for a new solution or a new idea, a new approach. Sometimes what happens when you go through that is you don't come up with a new solution. You come up with a solution you've already had and just never acted on it.
Mm.
And it takes kind of stopping the reaction, saying, okay, I have to approach this differently because this keeps happening to me, meaning I'm doing this. I'm not just the victim here. I'm the one. I'm the one. See, what's great about people who push your buttons is they do the same thing over and over again, and you act shocked every time.
That's true. Yeah.
Where's that? So who's to blame with that? They're doing the same thing, and you haven't figured that out yet, and yet you're still shocked every time. Like, that's what they do. The fact that it annoys you, it's kind of your problem. And it may not change until you deal with that. And magically, sometimes that's what it takes to get them to change. Is not you stopping having the reaction every single time.
Right.
Which often amplifies
feeding off of each other.
Feeding off that. So freeze frame says, okay, stop, change your focus, change your emotional state. Now see how to deal with this issue. And it isn't necessarily, by the way, freeze frame is not only for things like people that push your buttons and frustrate you in the moment. It could be around a tough business decision. And you're kind of, wow, this is complex. There's a lot of issues here. We got the vendor, we got the client, we got money. There's a lot of complexity here. We may need to cover different angles. So you do a freeze frame even in all that to see any new ideas that emerge. At least the worst that can happen is by going through that process, you've taken some of the steam out of the situation that was causing the upset and can get some more extra clarity. So that's the essence of freeze frame, a way to stop the reaction you're having, moving into it, shifting your state, shifting your energy, so that potentially a new idea, a creative breakthrough, a way of moving forward with the situation can occur.
Awesome. And you still teach HeartMath at Stanford University, correct?
I do.
Okay. I'm super excited because I'm going to Phoenix. I believe Arizona. It's in Arizona, right near Phoenix. I cannot think of the...
Scottsdale?
Anyways, Scottsdale, thank you. I'll be going to Scottsdale in March for my HeartMath training. And
right.
Tony's actually going to be my mentor through that. She was assigned to me. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So I'm super excited to dive into HeartMath and learn more about it so I can also train people on that. So I really appreciate your time today. We got about this far into the book. I mean, seriously, like I've read a lot of books, and this is probably one of my favorites, incorporating compassion into the workplace. And there's just so much data backing this. So I think anybody who needs that hard data would love this book too, because it's just everything. It's logic, it's hard, it's HeartMath. So I have recommended this to a lot of leaders, but I wanted to do this interview just to discuss it a little bit more, because I would like to get this back into circulation for you. I know you can find it on Amazon. You sent me the PDF version, but I got the hard copy because obviously I like to tab it. So thank you so much, Bruce, and it is a pleasure knowing you. I'm so happy that we stumbled upon each other on LinkedIn, and I look forward to our future connection and relationship. So
Absolutely. Well, it's a joy for me that this book, thanks to you, is having a little renaissance of its own. So I really enjoyed the writing of it and the revising it a couple of times. We did a CD-ROM at the time also that was all these cool video stuff. It's all outdated technology now, but there was a lot of life to it. And then my life shifted, as you know, and I hadn't put so much time into it. And yet more and more lately, and especially your response, people have been like curious about it and wanting to read it and like really think, wow, this is really cool. This is
yeah,
doesn't feel old because
it's a phenomenal book.
Thank you so much. I appreciate
Yeah.
it very much.
Yeah, and I know Daniel Goleman and Joe Dispenza, they've done a lot of research on HeartMath as well. So,
yeah, Joe, Daniel for sure. In fact, a fun story, an insider story about Daniel Goleman. He was a writer at the New York Times before Emotional Intelligence came out.
yeah,
We were in dialogue with him about a story in the Times around HeartMath. He was very intrigued by it. And we thought he was getting closer to writing an article. And then we told us one day, the head of PR, that he'd been pretty sidetracked recently because his new book was about to come out. And we said, oh, what's that? He said, it's emotional intelligence. So his whole life changed and he stopped working at the New York Times. And the article never came out that he was writing about HeartMath. But he's known about it for a very long time. And Joe has as well, Joe Dispenza has, and he is very actively, really, really encouraging people in his work of the value of HeartMath, the heart coherence tools, and the importance of it to the work that he's trying to help people, which is to do the reprogramming of our old mindsets and limitations and living in the future that we can live in.
yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, awesome.
Well, thank you again. And I hope you have a wonderful holiday season and
thank you.
New Year. And I look forward to hearing what you have in the works. Maybe we can do a follow-up on the Renaissance Human.
Love to. My pleasure.
Awesome.
Have a wonderful holiday yourself.
You too. Take care, Bruce.
Take
Bye.
care.
Just in case you missed the announcement that I did on Mindful Mention Monday, last Monday, I just want to let you know that I'm going to be cutting back from daily podcast releases to weekly podcast releases while I work on my second book and plan a conference. That said, the interview sessions will be conducted as usual every other Monday. And then the in-between weeks, between those interviews, I will continue to do Parenting with Emotional Intelligence on Wednesdays because that seemed to be one of the favorites out of all of the daily releases. So just a reminder for those of you who may have missed it or forgot and wondered, why are you not doing daily releases anymore? So I'm hoping that it's temporary once I get this book finished and get this conference rolling, hopefully 2022 or 2023. I haven't decided yet, but I know it's going to be a big undertaking. So I'm just going to go with the flow and see how it goes. All right, that is all I have for you. Again, thank you for watching and listening, and continue to live and lead with an open heart and an open mind.